Today, as we're delighted to have Eleanor Ferguson, who's Acting Registrar and Head of the Royal College Professional Conduct. She also leads a team responsible for investigating concerns. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be available on the VPMA member section, and also the VPMA have kindly agreed to make it available via the Royal College's website at a later date. You'll also be able to get CPD certificates from the member section later on also. Before I hand over to Eleanor, I just need to say that this is going to be a general webinar advising on the team approach of complaints process. Although we are able to take questions, and you'll see on the right hand side of your screen that the little questions button, you can type in questions throughout the presentation, and we will be able to take 10 minutes of answering questions at the end. These can't be about any specific complaint or anything that's happening at the moment. So I will hand over to Eleanor and start the presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Helen. The topic today is as Helen has said, is the team-based approach to the college's concerns processes. And it's something that I'm actually very happy to talk about, quite pleased to talk about, because our experience at the college here is that where someone has a concern raised against them, where they have support, where they're not isolated, it tends to reduce the anxiety, make the process speedier, and generally the outcome is better on all sides, better from our side as we can handle it quicker, better from the veterinary surgeon or veterinary nurse's point of view as well. But the title obviously is the team-based approach. But before I talk a little bit more about that and some of the practicalities, we always have to bear in mind that the RCVS regulates individuals. We don't regulate practices, we don't regulate teams. And when concerns are raised, they're about named veterinary surgeons or veterinary nurses. So ultimately, we do need to hear from the individual concerned. That doesn't mean, of course, that there shouldn't be others involved, and that's very much what we're talking about today. But there are some things that people sometimes assume. One of the things is that their employers will always know about it in advance. Generally, and we say this in our processes which are on the website, employers are notified about concerns, but it doesn't happen absolutely all of the time. Sometimes it's not clear from the information that we hold on our databases exactly what the practice structure is. Some practices have quite a flat structure, and it would be very difficult to work out who would be considered as the employer or the senior partner or such like. So that may not happen in these cases, because generally we will want to keep concerns confidential. That means that if a veterinary surgeon or veterinary nurse is getting assistance from someone, and for example that someone phones up the college wanting to help, we won't automatically start talking to them, discussing the matters about the complaint, the concern that's come in, without some form of authority from the individual veterinary surgeon that the concern's been raised about. So it's worth bearing that in mind. Another assumption that people sometimes make is that we will automatically contact indemnity insurers. We can do this if people ask us to do it, but it's not something that happens automatically as soon as a concern comes into us. So I suppose one of the other things that we want to look at is what's the key things that practice managers can provide, and one of these things I think is knowing what support is available, what can happen, what to expect, what is our processes. When we contact veterinary surgeons and we write to them, and veterinary nurses also, we do give links to the information on our website. But when someone is anxious, if they have a concern raised about them, it's not always the first thing that they think of. And if there's someone there that they can turn to who is a little bit divorced from the actual process itself and who can assist them with knowing what's happening, that does help. The process is the same for both vets and veterinary nurses. So a little bit about the concerns process, just very brief outline. From 2014, we've had a simplified 3-stage process. The first stage of this is the assessment and investigation stage, and this is carried out by the case examiner group. And that's made up of one veterinary surgeon or a veterinary nurse, one lay person, and a case manager from within the ProfCon department. They will look at it as the paperwork has come in from the person raising the concern. They will then, if required, get information from the veterinary surgeon or veterinary nurse, and they then have to decide how much information they need. It can be a little, it can be a lot, but what they are aiming to get is sufficient information for them to be able to decide if there is an arguable case. Arguable case is quite a low threshold. It's a technical term and it's quite a difficult one sometimes to put your finger on what it means. But generally, what we're looking at here is if everything the complainant says is correct, could it amount to something that would need to be looked into further? If people think there is that arguable case from the case examiner group, then it will go on to the next stage, which is the preliminary investigation committee. For veterinary surgeons, this is a committee which meets monthly. It's slightly less frequent for the VN preliminary investigation committee. On the vet side, there are 6 veterinary surgeons involved and 3 lay people. From the veterinary nurse point of view, usually there are 2 veterinary nurses, 2 lay and 1 veterinary surgeon make up the committee which will consider the cases that get referred to them. And what they are looking at is there a realistic prospect of establishing that there is what is called serious professional misconduct. Realistic prospect is not that it's an absolute slam dunk, absolute guarantee of success. Realistic prospect is better than 50-50 chance. Stage 3 is the disciplinary committee, and that is made up of, depending on whether it's vets and veterinary nurses, a combination of lay and vet input and veterinary nurse input. Other things that we have done and are involved in our process are a bit about language. We know people are anxious and we don't want to make it sound more legalistic than it has to be. We'll try as far as possible to use plain English, non-legal language, though sometimes when we're trying to explain concepts of serious professional misconduct and thresholds and the like, there is sometimes the necessity to go into what people might feel is a little bit more technical language. In the early stages of stage 1, we'll talk about concerns. If it turns into something that goes to our investigation, it becomes cases. But one of the other things that we do from the outset is, and this is generally at the stage 1 stage early on, the case manager will make contact with the person that the concern has been raised about. And the purpose of that phone call is so that the case manager can introduce themselves. That case manager acts as a point of contact, so that it's a named individual that you know who is looking after things from the college's point of view, and if you have any questions at all, you know to whom these should be raised. The call can also serve as an avenue for telling the person a little bit about the process, so a little bit about what to expect, and an opportunity to ask questions. We understand, however, that that might be a little bit much to expect in a first phone call, because up until this point, the person receiving the call may not actually have known that there's going to be a complaint at all. Sometimes you will, because it will be something that has been raised. You're aware of it, there has been an unhappy client and you're rather expecting it to come through. However, sometimes it can come a little bit out of the blue. So from that point of view, we understand it can be a difficult phone call. But what we would like people to take away from it is that you know the person to contact, you know that you can ask questions, and there will be an element of the case manager also trying to manage expectations to reduce the anxiety factor. That doesn't mean that there can be a kind of get out of jail card. They can absolutely promise or guarantee that this is a concern that's going nowhere. But what they can talk about is, on the basis of the information that they have available, what level of seriousness. They can talk about what's happened in similar cases in the past. But the main thing to take out of it all is, you know who's dealing with the case, you know who to talk to, and if all you want to do at that particular phone call at that early stage is take that information away, say that you're quite happy to have the information sent to you, you want to consider it when you have it in writing and you're able to take some advice, that's absolutely fine. But it is just the very first step. In the past, we used to send letters out, and the first thing that people would know would be the letter on the mat. We were somewhat criticised for that as being a bit blunt, and people felt that was difficult because they didn't at that stage have the opportunity to talk to someone. So this is why the phone calls were introduced. And we have had some good feedback. It won't be for everybody. Some people might find that the phone call is awkward, but on balance we're finding that that is something that has been working quite well. Other things we've tried to address, because we are aware that the longer things take, the more the anxiety factor goes up. We have introduced service standards, so our aim is that cases at the preliminary investigation stage will take no more than 9 months from start to finish, and at stage 1 it'll be around the 4-month mark. That doesn't mean some won't, and we hope a lot will be shorter, but that is a kind of average one that figure that we're looking at. Sometimes also we talk about, and you'll see language on our website information about cases being fast-tracked. This simply means that, and again it's an attempt to move things along and reduce anxiety, if we have matters which are serious and they are likely to go further, and for example we may have a serious conviction, or it may be that there is already a pattern of behaviour, there are already 2 or 3 concerns or cases already at investigation committee. We're trying not to make cases take longer than they need be, so that everything can be considered at the same time, so the overall package is that things will happen a little bit faster. When people think of complaints and the RCVS, I think sometimes in people's mind what springs to mind immediately is, oh, I'm going to be struck off. And what I would always say to that is, think back and think about the statistics before you jump to conclusions, so that it might mean that you can help to keep things in perspective. At the college we've got about 23,000 veterinary surgeons and thousands, I haven't got the exact figure on my fingertip, of veterinary nurses. But for veterinary surgeons, 23,000 vets, we get around 900, maybe slightly more than that, concerns will come in every year. So when you think of the thousands upon thousands of consultations that are happening every day, actually the chances of being and having a complaint raised against you are relatively small. For veterinary nurses, the numbers are much, much lower. We're probably around 50 or so in a year, so it's a much, much slower figure. But even within that, if a concern does come to us, about 80% of those concerns will be closed at that first investigation stage within around the first 4 months. So that means that only 20% will go on to the second stage and are considered serious enough to be looked at by our investigation committee. And of those 20% that go, only a very, very small number, around 1 to 2% of the total concerns, will actually ever go to a disciplinary committee. So I think the first thing that we'd be saying there is, even if a concern is raised, try and keep it in perspective, and that may be something that the teams around someone can help with, to make sure that panic doesn't actually set in at any stage. And the other worry again is, well, every single thing that goes wrong is going to turn into a concern, it's going to turn into a disciplinary case. So what I'd like to say here is, what are the things that we can actually look at? And these are that it's only concerns raised about an individual vet's fitness to practice, only the most serious concerns. And these might be, I suppose, the obvious ones: fraud, dishonesty, a serious criminal conviction. We're not talking here about speeding offences, we're not talking about minor things. It's possible that it could be something that is out with your actual operation of your practice. So for example, drugs-related offence, that could be something that could come in. But other things which might arise as affecting fitness to practice could be physical or mental health problems. And I'll talk a little bit later on about how our health protocol works. But the other thing which we can't deal with is negligence. And you'll all be familiar with the term, I'm sure, negligence, and that's the reason why you all hold professional indemnity insurance. And a question I'm often asked is, well, what's the difference then? How do I know what it is that the college is worried about? When is it one that my indemnity insurers will be dealing with, and when is it something that the college might be interested in if a concern is raised with them? So I think about it in terms really of a ladder and steps. If you think of the bottom rung of the ladder as being where things go wrong in the practice, the next step up in the rung is the negligence step, which would be, I think, where we could refer to that as where the conduct or whatever had happened falls below the standard required of the reasonable veterinary surgeon. And then above that, on a higher rung, is where the conduct falls far below. And that is, far below is what equates with serious professional misconduct, and that's what the college is ultimately concerned about. The top of the bullet point there talks about serious departures and the code, and a serious departure could be something that would get you into trouble. And again, this sometimes causes problems. Because what I'd like to say there is that the code and the guidance, it's not a rule book. So to give an example, it will say in the code and the guidance that veterinary surgeons, for example, should keep clear and accurate records. Does that mean that if on one occasion you don't, or your records are less than perfect, that you're going to be at a disciplinary committee? The answer, of course, is no. If, however, it was much wider than that, there's a pattern of behaviour, it could. But I think people need to understand, again, as part of keeping things in perspective, that it's not a rule book where one breach of paragraph 3.6 automatically translates over to a disciplinary hearing and a strike-off. Again, part of the keeping it in perspective. And again, just another list of some of the things here, I hope you can see on your screens now, the things that we can't deal with. These are things that members of the public often think we can do, though we can't. So we can't, as part of our statutory process, fine a vet. We can't order a vet to carry out additional treatment, to apologise, to refund fees or cancel fees. We can't give direct clinical advice about the treatment. We can't make an order for compensation. And as I've mentioned before, we don't resolve issues relating to negligence. Ultimately, the only way these could be resolved would be through the civil courts. So what can be done? Now, it may be a sort of unusual way to look about it, but what I would say is when you're thinking as a team of the things you can do, prevention is better than cure. And the best way to engage with the concerns process is actually not to have to come into contact with it at all. And there are various ways that you can look at this. First, one of the ways is making sure that the staff are familiar with the code and the guidance. It's on the website, and there is an app that can be downloaded and people can have it on their phones so that it's always available. That's so that people are familiar with it. In the ProfCon department, we have a team not just that look at concerns, but we also have an advice team. So as part of the prevention strategy, if somebody is not sure what to do or wants some advice, you can phone us up and ask us and say, in a particular situation, can you give us some advice? Another thing which we found can be of assistance and part of the preventative measures is when things do go wrong, do you have a process in place within your organisations for learning lessons from previous complaints? It means that if something has happened, if the information on a no-fault basis can be disseminated around your staff, it means that there's less chance of it happening in the future. And the other one is the strength of your own internal complaints handling systems and protocols. Because when we talk to the people that raise concerns at our end, and it's part of, we get this information also as part of the form that they send in to us, they will tell us what's happened, they'll tell us what they're wanting to get out of the concern that they've raised. And a recurring theme that seems to come in from them all, or a large number of them, not all, is a desire to be listened to. And a significant number will say to us, perhaps somewhere further down the line in the concern is, gosh, if only someone had listened to us, if only they'd discussed it with us, we'd never have raised the concern with the RCVS in the first place. So the strength of your internal policies can actually help. The other thing I think which people worry about is, as part of that internal structures and ways that you could address things, is apologies. We're all familiar with situations, you know, you have an accident in your motor car and insurers say to you all the time, whatever you do, don't admit liability. And that sometimes generates a kind of paralysis in that people are then frightened to say anything at all. Sorry goes a long way, and you can be sorry without actually admitting liability. You can be sorry that somebody is distressed, you can be sorry that things have gone wrong. And I think the way that these things can be handled, advice is available from indemnity insurers to assist in how you might go about that. Because certainly another of the things that people who send complaints to us talk about is, it would have been nice if somebody had recognised and perhaps said the word sorry. And other things that insurers can help with is, you may want to consider making offers of amends. Sometimes that is another preventative measure. But I think from the experience at our end, listening and discussing does help, and it can actually help retain clients in the long term. I think it's fair to say that once a concern has been raised with the RCVS, that's a client that's been lost to you. That's a loss to your business. And a well-handled internal concern can sometimes actually lead to a strengthening of the relationship. You maintain the client, you maintain the business, and you win in the end. There's no concern coming to us, and it's a better outcome for all of you, the team and the individual vet or veterinary nurse. So if a concern is raised, what do you do? First thing I would say is, don't panic. Keep it in perspective, but please don't bury your head in the sand. You might say, well, of course we wouldn't do that, but a surprising number of people delay and just kind of do nothing with it. It's not going to go away, so please do respond to us. If there's a practical difficulty why you can't respond immediately, you're about to go on holiday, or someone you want to speak to help you with it is not available, you can talk to us and tell us about it, so manage our expectations from that end. The other thing is, don't immediately necessarily rush to put pen to paper. Yes, don't bury your head in the sand, but think, who else is available? Who can assist me? Who else was around at the time? Gather in all the information, put it all together before you then think, right, what am I going to do and what am I going to say back as my full response to the RCVS? And the other thing I would ask people to bear in mind is, assume that whatever you write is going to be seen by the person raising the concern. The reason for that is that apart from the fact that people are entitled to know what's being said as a general principle, if you give us information and we use that to enable us to close down the concern and to deal with it, we have to people have to know how we've come by that information, so we have to disclose to them. But how can the team help in a practical sense? Well, the things we've talked about already: be familiar with our process, give support to colleagues, assist with the submission process, perhaps give them reminders. Have you done that? Can we help with looking out any information for you? But one of the things not to do is to reply on behalf of individuals. We have, and quite frequently we see practice principals or practice managers who may be accustomed to handling internal concerns processes, sending it in on behalf of someone and saying, well, this is what we think happened, this is what we're told happened. We have to hear from the individual concerned. And the other one, fairly obviously, is don't meddle with the information or the evidence given. It's very important that there is no sign from anybody involved with it that anything has in any way been tampered with. And the other thing, again, where teams can help, sometimes when cases go to the preliminary investigation stage, we require a little bit more information. We take formal statements. That may sometimes involve taking statements from other members of staff in the practice who were there and can tell us exactly what happened. And sometimes this is very important because we need to get the full picture. And that can be very stressful for the person who is under investigation, and very stressful for the other members of staff. So I think the team offering support, facilitating the taking of the statements to make it as easy as possible, all helps in the overall process. And this is just a little summary of some of the things which can be helped with: looking out contemporaneous clinical records. Are there any x-rays? Do we have them? Have we got consent forms? Were there any email exchanges? Increasingly now there may be telephone recordings or CCTV that would assist us. And all of this is to enable us to get as wide and clear a picture as possible. And sometimes people say to us, well, this feels a bit like having to prove our innocence. The situation that we're in is that unless we get the information from everybody concerned, we don't know it. So we will, to a large extent, rely on everybody involved to tell us about it. We do understand how that may feel from the receiving end, but what we're asking from is your help and your assistance to allow us to deal with and look at and investigate as easily and as quickly as we can. We do understand, having said all of this, notwithstanding the support that managers can give about perspective, because sometimes serious things do turn into serious consequences. So another source of assistance is to signpost staff members towards areas of support. That may be through professional indemnity insurers who can assist with letter writing and other questions about process, because they will be familiar with how we do things at the college. But sometimes it can also be getting external help, for example, through the VetLife helpline. And I touched on, I think at the very early stages, on the health and performance. In the past, when there were issues relating to addiction, sometimes perhaps there had been difficulties in a workplace, there had been concerns raised about what was going on arising out of addiction issues. The only thing that we could do was to send someone to a disciplinary hearing. And I think everybody would agree that for people with health-related issues, the last thing that's going to be of assistance is to end up at a disciplinary hearing, and it's not ultimately going to solve the problem. So a few years ago, we introduced the health protocol, and this is a scheme whereby, as an alternative to a disciplinary hearing, veterinary surgeons or veterinary nurses could be assessed by external medical practitioners, people specialising in those areas. They can give formal undertakings. It might be to undergo health checks, various programs to cure the underlying difficulties or manage the underlying difficulties. But sometimes there is in place the need to have a workplace supervisor. And this, it happens in a few number of cases, but that is something where, if it does arise, the support and understanding of the team around them would be instrumental to making it work. Because it will be quite difficult for the individual concerned, and it may require input from other members of staff. And there is the same situation as an alternative to a disciplinary case for what we would call performance cases. This may be problems caused by lack of competence in a particular area, where rather than actually taking someone to a disciplinary hearing where the level of outcome might be low, that would mean that they would be back in practice but not actually have addressed the underlying problem. We can address this by means of a performance protocol, which again works by way of undertakings, and it may be somebody else having to effectively sign off on that person's competence. So again, this might be something that could arise within a practice setting. Not hugely common, not a huge number of them out there, but it may happen, and maybe other areas where, if it does arise, the team can offer support around the individual concerned. And again, just very briefly, I just wanted to mention the fact that at the moment we do have an alternative dispute resolution trial running via the Ombudsman Service. And this, very broadly and generally speaking, deals with concerns that are unresolved. They are not ones where, generally speaking, there has been advice given, though it may be, if they continue to be unresolved, they could go to the Ombudsman Service. But this can only happen if both the veterinary surgeon involved and the member of the public agree. And as part of the trial, although the Ombudsman Service will ultimately come up with a recommendation, it's something that the individual and the veterinary practice concerned would have to accept. So, for example, we cannot still force people to do whatever it is that the Ombudsman Service might recommend. It might be something that you feel would be a good idea, but it's not something that we can actually compel someone to do as part of the trial. Having said that, we have had over 100 cases have actually participated in the trial, and the feedback that we've got is that many of the vets concerned have found that there is no case to answer, or the processes and the steps that they've taken themselves through their internal processes are in fact sufficient, and they've done all that is required. In some, there have been recommendations of some form of goodwill gesture, but I think the fears that were there at the beginning of the trial, that this was some no-fault form of compensation that was going to make sky-high awards in the thousands of pounds, just hasn't borne fruit through at the end of the day. So the trial is due to run for a little while longer, and then it will be reassessed to see whether or not it's something that we want to take forward as a means, as a kind of alternative, so that ultimately people who at the moment will automatically, if they can't find redress and they don't wish to go through redress through courts, could go directly to the Ombudsman Service or similar, some other organisation, if it was decided to go through a different route, as an alternative to coming to the Royal College. But we would still, obviously, for these serious cases, be looking at fitness to practice. So that, very briefly, is an outline of our processes, some ideas as to how you, in your practices as team members, might assist someone who has a concern raised against them. So I hope that's helpful and assist. And we're always happy to answer questions at any time. If anyone wants to phone into me afterwards, if they've got a specific concern about a specific matter that you're handling at the moment. But in the meantime, I'm very happy if you've any questions in the meantime.
Thanks, Eleanor. That was great. We do have a question that's come in from Lisa, and she's asking, how quickly do you inform the employer, as we need to know as soon as possible so we can offer support to our employees? As you can imagine, it can be quite distressing receiving a complaint, which I know you've covered. So yeah, if you can answer that, that'd be great.
We would try to do it in the early stages of within a few weeks of us getting the complaint. I mean, almost as soon as we are notifying the veterinary surgeon or veterinary nurse, we would be aiming to notify the employer. As I said, sometimes we've got difficulty identifying who the employer is, and we have to be quite careful that we don't inadvertently pass over information to somebody who shouldn't get it. Some of larger organisations have got a structure in place as part of the kind of almost terms and conditions for their staff, that there's a structure set up whereby they give us at the college a named individual, so that anytime we get anything in, we can automatically pass it on. And that's something for larger organisations that has proved quite useful, and as Lisa has said, enables people to be in a position to offer support sooner rather than later.
Thanks for that. I hope that's all right, Lisa. Another question has just come in. So if anybody else wants to ask any questions, just a reminder, you can use the question tab on your right hand side. But this question asks, is the Code of Conduct app available through the App Store? Would you know?
No, it's not. I'm not techie enough to know the reasons for that. I think it has to come from the website.
Okay. So has anybody else got any other questions? There was one that did come through earlier as well. It's really about sharing outcomes of complaints. So would you advise that practices share any complaints they have come into them, even if they don't get as far as you, to sort of learn from, I suppose, as a team? What's your advice about that?
I think that, I mean, in some ways it's a matter of judgment. There will obviously be some complaints, I think, that come into practices which are easily, they're not a particular thing where there is a learning issue. But I think there will be some where there is a very direct learning issue which other people could learn from, and that might inform the practice's policies. So it may be that something comes in that's a complaint against one particular veterinary surgeon, and it throws up something that suggests that perhaps a protocol could be worded differently, or additional information could be put on the website, or something that would assist. And I think there are various ways where not everything, I don't think everything should necessarily be disseminated, but I think there will be a number of occasions when there are learning opportunities. I would certainly recommend that anything that's shared is on an anonymous basis. I think it's important that in that sort of structure people feel free to say what has happened to them, to allow others to learn, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they want to have their name attached to it, particularly if, for example, it's going across multiple sites within an organisation. It might be that it could be pooled as a central resource, so that, and someone can anonymise it so that people can then have a look at it, and everyone can learn from everyone else's experiences.
Okay, that's great. So there's no other questions coming in yet, so maybe just give everybody a chance to ask any other questions they may want at this time, and then we'll wrap it up. Just to remind everybody that we're getting the thank yous coming in now. Thank you, really enjoyed listening. That's from Karina, so thanks, Karina. To remind everybody that this has been recorded and it will be available to listen again. So if you got distracted during this at lunchtime, you are able to listen to it again. Also, you are able to get your CPD certificates from the website. That's another thank you for you, Eleanor, from Gemma. So as there are no questions, I think it's probably time for everyone to go and get a coffee before starting back at work. So thank you very much. The next webinar date will be released soon, and we hope you can join us for that. Again, more thank yous, Eleanor. So I think it was been well received. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye-bye.